Let me get my audio.
Here we go. All right, everybody, welcome back. This is Shortboxed Interviews. My name is Crow. I'm the head of marketing at Shortbox. This is Kevin. I'm pointing to you.
This is Kevin McCormick from Shortboxed, your friendly neighborhood business development specialist and
that's such a long
extraordinaire. Yeah, I made it even longer there.
Well, look, all right, it's not always the length of the title that counts, everybody at home. I'm sure you know. And then, of course, today with us, we have the legendary J.H. Williams of the Third. And since I just introduced you, it sort of took the wind out of your sails.
If you guys can't tell, this interview is going to be full of laughs. That's the motif we're going for. Yeah.
You know, memories. I think we're going to be talking about this for a long time. Anyway.
Yeah.
I guess I guess the first thing to do is for those of who are tuning in that are not familiar with you. And by the way, I'm asking now for the crowd, so it doesn't look like I'm being presumptuous. Is it okay if we call you Jim?
Sure.
Okay, we're going to call you Jim. So Jim and J.H. Williams, same for the people who are having trouble putting two and two together, it's the same person. Jim, do you want to introduce yourself to the folks who may not be familiar with you? Yeah.
My name is J.H. Williams, as we've just established. I've had a long career doing comics, longer than I can actually count at this point. I've done stuff from, lots of stuff for DC and Marvel, but primarily known for books like Promethea, Seven Soldiers of Victory, Batman, Batwoman, Sandman, Overture, Desolation Jones, stuff like that. But my current project is Echo Lands with Image Comics.
Awesome.
Which like, not to speak out of turn, but it is incredible, Jim.
Oh, thank you.
Huge fan. Yeah.
Thanks.
I'm a huge fan of just off format books, which was the initial pitch, and then I saw the art and it was just like, oh, of course, I need this.
Cool.
Yeah.
You know what's funny? I had sort of a weird. So when I was growing up, I was into comic media, but not comic books. So I couldn't afford comic books. So the only thing I had was Wizard magazine, really. And I was born in the mid '80s, so I really came into like my own in like the '90s, whatever. But then I stopped reading for a while. But anyway, I started reading again in full in like 2011, 2012. And I went to my local comic book shop in San Francisco, and I talked to James Syme, who I know you know, pretty well. And
James is fantastic.
Oh, he's the best. But he told me he's like, well, you're an adult getting back into comics. Why don't I give you something good to read? How about Promethea? And I was like, I don't know what that is. So he showed it to me. And you know how some people talk about, they're sort of the artist that like showed them a certain thing. So like, for example, you, for me, are the artists that I associate with cosmic, like otherworldly art.
Interesting. Cool.
Some people are like, Jack, that's Jack Kirby for me. And I'm like, well, it is for me too in a certain way, but really when I think of like an amazing like astral projection and like the amazing layouts in Promethea are the things that I think about. So it's really great for me to be talking to you as well.
Cool. I appreciate that. Thanks.
And just for a little background from my end, I managed a comic shop for the last 5 years before I took this job with Shortbox, Jim, and I can't even count on all fingers and toes how often people would come in looking for your work and how incredibly difficult it was to find anything similar to it. Like you are a style in and of yourself, my friend. We get people that would come in and that's all they wanted. They're like, I love Batwoman. I love Promethea. What else can you recommend that's like this? And oftentimes it was just another J.H. Williams III book. Like it's really hard to find stuff that speaks to people, I think, on so many levels and sort of drives that like real hungry seeking for something similar. So
that's cool.
Just a little bit of perspective from the retailer end of things. Like
that's
your
cool.
stuff
I don't
sells
really
great.
Get that. Yeah, I don't really hear that sort of information. There's primarily the only retailers I ever really talked to.
Yeah,
I mean, I've had some discussions with some retailers here and there, but it's like few and far between. But the retailers I talk to the most regularly is the store I go to here, Ralph Matthew, for Alternate Reality Comics, who's super supportive. I mean, he's the sweetest guy. And then James Syme, so I really don't get that kind of feedback from retailers.
Yeah, I mean, it also kind of goes to show, just in like the success I think the shop is having with Echolands as
Oh,
well.
good.
People have been hungry for what you put out, and now they've got something to eat. So
Cool,
I
cool.
can't wait to see how that story progresses. I actually moved up here around the turn of the year when the Echoland stuff was coming fast and furious. So I actually still have a couple issues to catch up on, but I am very much looking forward to digging into those.
Cool, cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I sort of want to start from the beginning, because it's great that you brought up Echolands, because it's your your most recent work, I believe, unless I'm wrong. It's your big thing right now. So, but what about at the beginning? I remember reading in an interview once that you said that you knew you were going to be. Hey, why don't you tell me about your beginning, and then I'll tell you what you said.
That's okay. Let's go. Go ahead. It's fine.
Just listening to myself, an incredible interviewer over here. What
Is there a Zoom filter that you can add a big white beard to your face, Crow? Maybe that would help.
How about a Zoom filter that teaches me how to be a good interviewer? That'd so one time when you said that you had made this proclamation as like an 8 or 9 year old, I'm sure I'm butchering this. You said, I'm going to be a comic book artist. How did you get to that point? What did you see? Like, what made you decide that? And how were you so, you made this bold proclamation. What were the reactions around you? And then like, how did you start making that happen?
Well, I mean, in retrospect, I was, quite a naive child, having no idea how hard of a task I set out for myself. But the way I came to the conclusion so young was I had been reading comics since I can really remember in some way or another. But I wasn't like, I didn't understand how they were made when I was that age, until a certain point when I had an epiphany, basically. So it kind of, while I read comics and I was drawing all the time, trying to, like, oh, I like this, drawing of Spider-Man.
Right.
Can I draw Spider-Man? That kind of thing, right? Or Iron Man. I remember distinctly, I know I don't have it anymore. I remember distinctly drawing my own like Marvel Heroes battle, like it had Hulk and Iron Man and Spider-Man in it. I have a memory of that, some sort of just single image thing that I did. So it was very, I was into what the art looked like way young. But I was also super obsessed with anything that was science fiction or adventure. So, of course, Star Wars comes into it when you're that age. My first exposure to Star Wars was when it first came out. All that kind of stuff, Star Trek, Ultraman, all that kind of stuff.
Cool.
But because I was so in love with that, I also gravitated towards, science fiction, like based toys. So I had like Rom the Space Knight. Awesome. And I had like Shogun Warriors. I had, well, G.I. Joe is less science fiction-y, but I had some G.I. Joes, like the big ones,
Oh yeah.
Like with the Kung Fu grip and stuff.
Like the G.I. Joe dolls, I think they called them back then, because how big they were.
Yeah, and I had the Mego Marvel Heroes.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I had a bunch of those. I regret that those vanished somewhere. But I also got into these toys called Micronauts.
Of course.
Which were the exact opposite of a lot of the other toys I had, because they're really tiny, right? But they were so imaginative. I was just blown away by these things because they were so unusual looking, and they were so diverse in their presentation. Not just the characters, but the vehicles, the robots, the creatures, all of it. And so I was just completely gonzo over those toys. And I remember going to the local 7-Eleven store. It might not have been 7-Eleven at that point. It might have been like a Stop and Go or something. It was called Stop and Go, I think. And that was always on my way, walking around our neighborhood. It seemed farther from the house when I was young than it actually was. But they always had a comic spinner rack. And and I had, read some Marvel comics and things like that, of course, like I was saying, but I came across Micronauts #1 on that spinner rack, and I'm like, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
I was so crazy for the toys. It never crossed my mind, the whole idea of IP cross media stuff, right?
Right. Yeah.
So I was really like, what is this thing? I bought it right away. I sat down right away to read it because I was so obsessed with those toys. I just was like, I was, going crazy to read this thing. And it was unlike any of the comics I had really been exposed to before. And I'm not sure why, what it was about it that hit me so strongly, other than as I got older, thinking about some of the themes that were in there. It was a story that was, Bill Mantlo didn't talk down to you, even though he knows he's writing this comic book based on a series of toys.
Yeah.
He created this science fiction tale that had a lot of really sophisticated themes going on in it. And I don't know if I kind of intuitively could sense that about it. And then Michael Golden's artwork was just like, what? It was
good.
Yeah, it was unlike anything I had really seen before. And it forced me to really pay attention to every detail on every page, to where I finally really paid attention to the credits box. I finally really understood the credits box. I discovered it, you could say. Yeah. Before that, I was always like, oh, I always knew Stanley presents Spider-Man, or Stanley presents this, or whatever. But beyond that, I was like, I didn't know any better, right?
Yeah.
But when I discovered that credits box and saw the names, Matlow, Golden, Milgram, I don't remember who the colorist was.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate, but I should go look. I have them upstairs. But I just became, I was just enamored by that, and was like, whoa, somebody made these,
Yeah.
And I became super obsessed with that comic. And then other friends at school who also would read comics from time to time, I was like, hey, I found this comic. Have you seen this comic? Micronauts is like so great. And they were like, oh, well, if you like that, you've got to see this other comic called Uncanny X-Men, which was around the Dave Cockrum, John Byrne, Chris Claremont era.
Yeah.
They showed that to me, and I was blown away by that just as much as I was Micronauts, even though it felt extremely different. But it really stood out to me. Because before, the only comics that really popped out to me as a kid before that was probably a little bit of Jack Kirby stuff. But at the time, I didn't understand the context of it, So when I saw Uncanny X-Men, and I read some of that, I was like, what the? My mind was just blown away about, like, wow, these stories are just incredible. The art is incredible. I just became like this instant super fan at a really, really young age. And it was at that point, oddly enough, I don't know why, I don't have any memories of my rationale besides being enamored with the stuff to say, oh, well, I can draw. I'm going to be a comic book artist.
Yeah.
And that was it. I mean, it was that, it went from 0 to 60 like that. And I just never lost sight of that goal, having no idea how hard that would actually be.
It's just like an incredible, like, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a dinosaur. So because I was an idiot child, and that's fine. Most kids are. But like you said, this is like, I mean, I can't, I guess I don't know this, but it feels like you're like, this is the thing I want to do. And you're just like, and then you did it. And luckily, I mean, I guess it just depends how you feel about the concept of talent, but you had the talent to get there, which is.
That's debatable. my early stuff is, I don't know how I got published.
I want to see some of those old sketchbooks, Jim.
Oh yeah, that'd be very cool.
But I mean, I think it was just the sheer audacity of will
Yeah.
You know, I gave myself no choice. Much to the, you know, at the time, the frustrations of my parents, because
Sure.
they're, you know, especially as I got into my high school years,
Mm.
junior high and high school years, they're like, you gotta figure something out, because what if that doesn't work?
Yeah.
Right? And I'm like,
Yeah.
I gave it no credence. I was like, there is no choice.
Yeah.
So it was like one of those things, like I either became a comic book artist, or I would have been walking the streets, because it's like,
Yeah.
you know, I gave myself no choice, which is,
Like,
you know,
incredible. I can
kind
just
of
imagine.
a little bit insane.
Yeah.
I can just imagine the parents, Williams, being like, "Yeah, you know, your Spider-Man looks great, but what's a covalent bond, Jim? What is a covalent bond?"
Yeah, exactly.
No son of mine is going to be an artist.
Yeah, study to be a dentist or something.
As you got a little older and as your career trajectory started to take shape, did your parents ever sort of soften on that and kind of come around to appreciating the contributions you're making to the industry, or was that always a point of contention with you and your folks?
They came to a realization that there was, you know, this was what it was going to be. I don't know if they understood how I could make a life out of it
Sure.
until I was making life out of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
They particularly appreciated my ability that I presented at the time, you know, that I could draw,
Yeah.
and could progress in that. It wasn't just like,
Right.
oh, I could draw and I stayed one
Right.
level, right? I
Right.
kept trying to improve. And I think it helped a little bit. Like, my dad was a painter, or he could
Oh,
draw
okay.
too. So I think he liked that I was
Yeah.
into that stuff. But
Did
I
you and
don't
Pops
know,
ever
we never really
collaborate
had
at
the
all?
conversation
Yeah.
of what they actually felt about me making a successful career.
Okay.
My dad had told me, you know, a couple times he was proud,
That's
and he
good.
was excited to see the first books, especially when they started coming out in nicer collections and stuff, and he could, like,
Yeah.
it's really substantial book. He liked that,
Cool.
but we never had a deeper conversation about it.
Okay. I was gonna say, did you and Dad ever collab on any art together at all?
We used to, when I was around the same age of trying to figure out to be a comic book artist.
Yeah.
It's interesting because my dad, well, he was a big music fan, and he would do drawings of his favorite musicians and stuff like that,
Mhm.
just for the fun of it. But the other thing he did for fun is coloring books. So my parents divorced when I was an infant, and there was a period of time where I would go, when I got old enough, I would go stay with him in the summers.
Yeah.
For a while I couldn't do that because he was in the military, U.S. Air Force, and was stationed overseas.
Oh,
But once
okay.
he got back here, he got stationed permanent stateside duty, and lived in Minnesota for a while. And I would go stay with him during the summers in Minnesota. And one of the things that he would do, I had no idea until I lived with him a little bit, but he had these coloring books, and a lot of it was like Marvel comics, Jack Kirby and stuff. And
Oh,
he would
cool.
do these color books of Jack Kirby art. I remember distinctly him, trying to explain to me at that age, like, no, when you color these, staying within the lines and this and that. He said, but make anything, whatever color you want. And he was like doing this really nice color of Captain America, Jack Kirby Captain America, but it wasn't Captain America colors. And I'm like, why aren't those Captain America colors? And he's like, it doesn't matter. He's like, just have fun and
Okay.
whatever color you want,
Yeah.
So that we used to sit there and color and coloring books out at the kitchen table. Nights.
And then you took it to the far extreme and said, I can just put any art style I want all in the same series, right?
That came later with some different kinds of epiphanies.
Good. Okay. All right. Very, very cool. All right, I have a question for you that has to do with the state of things these days. You know, we've all been living at home for the past couple of years. COVID's changed some things around the hobby and the industry. It's made it hard for some shops to stay open and things like that. But it also seems to me like being a work from home mostly job anyways. Has COVID really impacted your work process at all, or the collaboration process between you and your cohorts? Or
it hasn't really affected my daily process.
Yeah.
Other than there was a period of time, I guess ever since I started working on Echolands, I've had various things come up here and there in my life that have really crimped my level of production speed, I guess you could say. While trying to develop something from the ground up, complete world building stuff, which also slows me down a lot.
Yeah.
So I would say the only impact it's had is the stressors of it.
Sure.
There was a level of exhaustion, and that came on top of these other life events that happened to me. That was already had impacted me that way.
Right.
So I don't know what my answer is to solving those things, other than I just keep doing what I do, and I do what I can.
Right.
And accept where things are. That's the hard part, is accepting the situation.
Yeah.
It affected,
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to add to that. The only relationship it affected with any of my partners, where I live, I have a co-writer partner that we've been working on various projects. Some of them have been greenlit or will find the light of day at some point. They're being worked on, but we used to meet every week and have writing sessions. That all got tossed out. And there was a period of time where, because everyone was just like, their frame of mind was destroyed on being creative for a bit. That I got to the point where, like, I couldn't write other than writing for Echolands. Or draw for Echolands. I was having a hard time. I think it's that exhaustion, that mental exhaustion, where I just couldn't focus on anything outside of that for a while. So all that stuff kind of got shuffled to the side a bit, you know. He was completely understanding, and it's early in his career, which sucks for him that there's this big delay for him. But at the same time, we do know that things are being worked on in some capacity with some of our other creative partners. So you know.
So would you say that Echolands was kind of like your security blanket when you were having problems of like creative like stagnation during COVID? Like something that you've been working on since you were young, and you've had ideas for forever, finally being able to block out the stuff that's going on in the world and have something that was comfortable and familiar that you could focus on?
Oh yeah. There's been a period of time where, like, even with the political side of what the world has been for 6 years or
sure.
Time is meaningless.
There's definitely days where I'm like, can everything just leave me the fuck alone? I just want to draw my book. I just want to, but I don't know what it is about my personality. I have a hard time being able to shut those things off sometimes.
Yeah.
Like the events of this week, I've been working, but at the same time, it weighs on me,
Absolutely.
I can't help but think of those things. So yeah, it's been a haven, but at the same time, it's a little tough too, because Echolands is difficult work.
It is.
So in that regard, it wasn't helpful on a stress level.
Oh, okay.
You know what I mean?
That makes sense. Totally.
If anything, I felt more stressed about what was happening with the book and what I was doing with the book, the schedule of the book, than before. Thank God I have my wife who is like, she's like, what can you do about it?
That's cool to have.
Nothing. She's like, then just try to let that go and just be in the moment. This is what it is.
Yeah,
you can do about it.
Like a grounding force.
yeah, even my feelings about how long a page might be taking or whatever. And she's like, is there anything you could do differently? And I'm like,
Yeah.
no. She's like, okay. And then on the other side, I have, to thank the universe for Eric Stevenson as well over at Image Comics.
Yeah.
He, like when the pandemic first took, he's been like a big supporter and in my corner for Echo Lands from the outset.
Jim, do you mind telling everybody who Eric Stevens is real quick?
He is what is his current title? He's what president, publisher of Image Comics.
Cool.
I can't remember what his title is actually. That's pretty funny.
He's Eric.
Anyway,
it's just Eric. That's
he's the chief creative officer and current publisher at Image.
Man, when you got chief in your name, that's big cookies.
Yeah. And so from the beginning of Echo Lands, even with the previous problems with schedule and my workflow because of life issues, he's been 100% supportive that entire time.
Yeah.
And he's been gracious in, like, if I'm feeling trepidatious about something, or like the schedule is gone completely out of whack or whatever, I communicate with him, and I'm like, I express myself to him, and he's receptive to that, and is always like a stabilizing voice besides my wife, which is, I need that. And so I'm super grateful that I have those in my life, because I don't know, if I'd be able to mentally keep it together. Otherwise, I have trouble in that area. So,
sure.
So I'm going to bounce back a little bit because you mentioned a writing partner, and I think one of the most famous writing partners of all time that you have is Alan Moore. And I was lucky enough to talk to James Syme. For folks at home, James Syme is a owner of a local comic book shop, Isotope Comics, and he knows everyone, and he knows Jim, and they're apparently pretty close. And he said that you and Alan are, I guess I don't know the current state, of pretty good friends. What is it like working with a writer of that sort of, you can't even begin to approach how important he's been for comic books. What was that like as a creative partner and also as a friend? Yeah, I mean, Alan and I's relationship is kind of interesting, good and bad. So the bad part is, once Promethea was done, and I have found this with other creative partners too, and I have a feeling I'm not the only creator that experiences this scenario, where the conversations become fewer and far between. Because there isn't the constant necessity of getting the work done, right? So, unfortunately, I haven't been able to communicate with him as much as I would like to. It just, before you know it, so much time goes by. But at the same time, even while that takes place, I love him. I can't. He matters to me, even when we're not communicating hardly at all. He's always in my mind a lot, because he means so much to me, not just on the creative side of what that relationship was like, but at the beginning of it, I had never met Alan, never talked to Alan at all. My beginning stages of getting the Promethea job, I had no communications with him. It was all through the editorial. So Scott Doombeer was the editor of the America's Best Comics line that Alan was producing. And I got just this random, I think it was a phone call, actually. That's back when editors made phone calls. Jim, if you can actually tell everybody what a phone is real quick in case they're tuning. I'm just sorry to interrupt.
It's like this, but shaped very differently.
Oh, wow. The marvelous past.
So I remember getting a random phone call from Scott Doombeer saying, hey, we're doing, I'm from Wildstorm. I want to talk to you about possibly doing this thing with Alan Moore.
Cool.
You were recommended to me from Alex Ross.
Oh, Wow.
Just names on names.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No big
wow.
deal. Alex Ross.
Alex Ross
Yeah.
recommended me.
And later I found out also recommended from Todd Klein, which I didn't know until after I was already on the
Wow.
job. But I don't know how I got recommended to him from Alex Ross, because I had never met Alex at that point. So he must have liked something I was doing.
Yeah.
And so Scott Doombeer is like, he's like, I have to admit, I'm not overly familiar with some of your stuff. He says, but, I want to listen to what these guys are saying. Do you have samples you could send me, and I will forward them to Alan. And so I'm like, huh. And I got off the phone with Alan, like, whoa, that's wild, right?
Yeah.
Told my wife about it, of course. Immediately was like excited. But I gathered up a bunch of photocopies of various things, and I made sure to put in some things that, because I was already an Alan Moore fan, of course.
Right.
So I put in some things. I'm like, huh, this here and this here, he might appreciate what I did here, because this is different. And I understood, Alan was always trying to do something different, and I appreciate, that's one of the things I loved about his writing. And so I put some stuff in there. I never got the conversation with Alan to ask him what was it specifically that made him go say yes, of the things I sent to him.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, I gathered all this stuff together. I sent it off. I guess maybe a couple weeks went by. I don't remember what I was actually drawing at the time, but a couple weeks went by, and then Scott Doombeer calls me back, and he's like, hey, Alan loves this stuff. He's like,
So cool.
He says, you're the guy.
Sure.
And he goes by, he's so, what do you say? What do you want to, you want to jump on this? And I was like, at the time, it's so funny. I'm like, can I think about it?
Whoa.
And he's like, think about it. He's like, it's Alan Moore. But I was like, I don't know. I always kind of like don't rush those kinds of decisions. I at least like to take a day.
Yeah.
And I always like to run things past my wife too, particularly in the early days of my career. She was extremely helpful, guiding me on those decisions. And but I remember getting off the phone before giving, at that point, and saying they want me for the job, and both of us were jumping up and down.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, of course we're going to say yes, but it was like you just had to take that moment and think, to think it for a moment. But it was funny because during that conversation, Scott tells me, he's like, I gotta be honest with you. He's like, you weren't the first choice. We had looked at some other people, but they couldn't do it for whatever reason or another. And one of them was Alan Davis.
Mm.
Oh, wow.
Who else did he say? I can't remember who else he said. I remember specifically Alan Davis, and they couldn't do it for whatever reason. So I wasn't Scott's first choice.
Yeah.
Of course, he's looking for the name guy, right?
Of course.
And at that time, I was barely making a dent. Chase had come out, and people liked Chase, but it wasn't like this giant, massive hit, and everyone's singing, Kumbaya about J.H. Williams projects,
Right.
So it was interesting that he was honest with me about that, which is super cool. And then but then he tells me, Alan's like, no, that's the guy. Yeah. And that really kind of sets you back on your heels a little bit, when you think about that. And so, of course, the next morning I call back and was like, I'll do it, And then I got to speak to Alan at that point. So the first conversation I had with Alan, I had no idea what to expect. I don't think I ever heard him speak before.
Oh, did you know he was English?
Like articles, interviews and articles, but I never heard his voice. And his voice is, you've seen videos of him. It's very baritone and has a lot of gravitas to the sound of his voice. So the first time I got on the phone, I was nervous as hell. I mean, super nervous. And then his voice is so commanding while still being warm. But he immediately put me at ease and was like, awesome. Super sweet. Was, just like, he's like, I really like what I saw. He was, and this is what my idea is. And we just immediately got to work. And very, very quickly, he made me feel comfortable in bringing my mind to the equation.
Yeah.
He wanted that sense of collaborative aspects that make comics so great. And what made me realize that really early on, they sent me like the first script. I think the scripts were ready like before I came on. The first script was written. And there's different passages in there where he goes, it's famous how detailed Alan's scripts are.
Right.
And I already knew that. So I knew what to expect. And I was, but when I first read it, and he would go into this heavy detail, and then he's like, but if you see it differently, Jim.
I can't even imagine. So like, I was just, I'm an aspiring comic book writer myself, and I work with my artists, and sort of I kind of give over to their artistry, sort of their vision. I can't even imagine the Alan Moore script, and then what you produce, because your art is some of the most insane stuff I've ever seen. It is obviously in a good way, and so I'm like, how did you get there? And I've never actually seen a script that you've worked on. I haven't looked at it. I just haven't come across it. So how do you, it's just incredible to me how you would turn, because the spreads that you make are indescribable. I mean, we're going to have to put up some pictures or something, because me even trying to talk about one of your 2-page spreads where, I don't even know how to describe, I don't even know how to talk about it.
A little bit about the process of that was, so when Alan said, if you see it differently, go for it. One of the things I always loved about Alan's writing is his experimentation.
Mm-hmm.
He was always trying to look for a different angle. And so some of that was in the scripts from the very, very beginning. But when he said, hey, if you see it differently, he was, to go for it. I wasn't sure what that meant. And so there was, at the beginning, I would call him like, hey, this is what you're describing, but I see it kind of working maybe like this or whatever. And he'd be like, he's like, that's fine, Jim. What, that's how you want to do it, then let's do it that way. And he was just so like a matter of fact about it. And there was no ego in that part.
Right.
And so I quickly learned that he was sincere in letting me craft things the way I wanted to. And we, in our conversations, I suspect, without having had the conversation, I suspect one of the things that gravitated Alan to making me the choice was issue 1 million of Chase, when DC did the DC 1 million thing.
Yeah.
Because I chose some strange layout decisions in there because I wanted the comic to feel like unlike another comic.
Mm-hmm.
I have a feeling he saw that, and that's what made him go, yeah, this guy is doing something
experimental, something new. Yeah.
And so when he was injected some of that into the scripts, and then we built conversations around that, and then I expanded on that, it quickly became the situation where Promethea was like 50% of the layout ideas came from him, 50% came from me.
Wow.
And so it almost became like this, we're trading off on ideas where we're like, oh, you thought of this, that made me think of this, let's try that. like this real kind of like, hey, let's see what we can do.
Right.
Incredible.
And and it was just really, to have that so early in my career made such a huge impact on me. And I don't know, I guess even though it was kind of, I have no idea what was going on in my head at the time, other than I just wanted to try to do something that was unique. And I feel like Alan, could sense that. He was looking for something unique too. And it led to this relationship where, it quickly went from me being this nervous new guy, getting a chance to work with this, the enormity of Alan Moore. To, hey, we're partnership in this. We're doing this together. This is, it was never unbalanced in who was the more important creative force, which is incredible. And it was a huge learning lesson for me, and it built my confidence a lot, particularly when, some of the things we came up with, I remember Alan saying to me in one phone call, because he was showing the work to Melinda Gebbe, and she was like, how is this possible? How are you guys, this is comics, how are you doing this?
Well, it's funny to see like current comics and people, as a retailer, people commenting on like, check out this page layout, it's mind-blowing, it's, I've never seen anything like this done. And then you go back to some of your earlier work and you were really on the cutting edge of that creative use of paneling. I mean, it really sort of crescendoed with Batwoman, and now with Echo Lands, just like the frames are part of the story, which it just pulls you in so much more. So I can see the progression. It's really cool going back and looking at some of your older work to prep for this interview, seeing where you came from, which I mean, you've been doing this stuff for a long time, and it's just further gotten sharper and better and more distinct. So you've accomplished, I think, what you set out to do, man. You're known for the double page spread. You're known for like that painterly style mixed with other styles, all within the same issue. And it's the kind of stuff that people take notice of, and it sticks with them. So
thanks. I think one of the things that prepped me for I look at my career trajectory, even though, I wasn't one of those guys who came onto the scene who became popular like that, right?
Right.
But I look at my career trajectory as a real arc happening. I couldn't do what I'm doing now if I hadn't done whatever I did beforehand.
Totally.
Or from where I started. And I can bring that all the way back to before I actually got my first comics work, when I was, a teenager. I had a class in school. It was an off-campus class that was advertising, art, and design. And the teacher, it was interesting, Mr. Eckert, or Eckert. I can't remember how you pronounce it. I think it was Eckert, spelled Ueckert. I think that's how it was spelled.
It's like a Bob Euchre, the old, anyways, he's an announcer.
That class, I think, honestly prepped me for what I brought to the table for comics, because it was all about the thinking involved. And so quite often he would use me as an example in the class, because I was always noodling and drawing and trying to do good drawing. For the time it was okay. And he was like, Jim, his drawings look good because he's always drawing. But what we're after here is, why is he drawing that? Why is he choosing to draw what he's choosing to draw? And so the entire class was built around the thinking, the idea behind the image. And I think that slowly creeped into my comics work, at first subconsciously, And that probably led to me trying to do different things because I'm trying to see what I can gain out of it.
Yeah.
What does this do if I do this? Or if I try this style, what does that do? What is the emotional or analytical impact on the story or that particular scene in the story,
Yeah.
Yeah. And
that's
just
so cool.
keeps evolving I keep trying to get it to evolve.
Yeah. I mean, I never look at your stuff and feel like it's done just to look cool. There always feels like there's intent that the decisions you've made in the design are deliberate.
Yeah.
And I was actually even wondering, do you use art like that to like force tonal shifts between different plot arcs as like a form of like controlling the work that you're on? Or do you do it more to invoke that thought process behind the intent and things like that?
Thought process to gain what the first descriptor was that you just said, to
get a little control over how the narrative is interpreted and what sinks in with people. Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool.
When you get, since you haven't gotten us to read the latest issue of Echolands yet, you'll see there's a really clear example of this as the characters finally take off in the rocket ship that we introduce.
Yeah.
And they go into this, they fly across the horizon and as they fly across the horizon, it's a nighttime sky with these bright pink clouds and this crazy cosmos, like a cosmos you don't see on Earth. There's a broken apart moon and this little tiny, super colorful rocket ship just arcing across the sky. And it's just loaded with color and dreaminess. Then they start to descend. And when they descend, they end up in Horror Hill.
I saw some screenshots of Horror Hill when I was looking into it, and I just I got chills. It looks so
sounds
cool.
amazing.
Right. And so that whole trajectory on a visual level is meant to cause a certain emotional impact on the reader, because we knew from the outset Horror Hill was going to be this black and white horror world that evokes old monster movies and old 1970s horror comics. That kind of vibe to it. But Echolands, the world of Echolands is so colorful. And so I'm like, okay, before we settle into this black and white world, let's smack people in the face with a load of color.
That's
and
awesome.
Dreaminess and really send how vividly alien this place can be, but beautiful in its dreamy color so we front load the color before we descend into black and white, which is almost in a sense a reverse mode of thinking of what they did on Wizard of Oz.
I was just about to say that sounds like Wizard of Oz. I was gonna
and it creates an emotional punch without ever saying a word. You're defining and selling a vibe in each of those circumstances and how one leads into the other. So I think if we had done some just ordinary scenes before delivering the first Horror Hill scenes, it might
have landed, but it wouldn't have punched you quite as hard.
It wouldn't have been like going from that punch of vivid color into a black and white world. It causes the subliminal change in the reader. It makes them their inner selves, hopefully, if I'm done it well, it causes them to have this inner change within themselves as they're experiencing that.
I mean that you said that. I mean, it's I was just thinking about even as a kid, one of the most stunning things that I saw in movies, one of the first things I remember is that change from black and white of Wizard of Oz to the absolute saturation of color, and it was amazing. And I was a kid. I'm not old. I didn't grow up with black and white movies, but I just remember being like, oh my god, that that had a really big impact.
Yeah, even seeing it today, when every once in a while when it comes on TV or whatever, I happen to sit down and watch it, it still has that punch to it. Where he was like, even though it's coming, you're like, it still hits you so like, whoa, it's so rich, It's amazing that they pulled that off.
This brings me to another question that I'd written down that I wanted to ask you about. Forgive me for not doing a little bit more research beforehand, but with like Echolands and your Batwoman work, Did you color it, or did you have a colorer that worked with you guys to do both of those books? Because I know you're always credited as writer and pencil and inks and stuff like that, but the color, I mean, it's such a huge part of what you do is color.
Yeah.
And I see, you know, in your credits that you're credited as color on some stuff, but
Yeah.
for Echolands and Batwoman, which to me sort of define your style for the modern comic fan, did you work with a colorist? And follow-up question, are you a colorist's favorite person to work with, or a nightmare because of all the styles?
Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah.
You know, I'm curious. Yeah.
I worked with Dave Stewart and I partnered up as a team at the outset of Seven Soldiers of Victory.
Okay.
And we did that, and we did the Batman stuff together.
Okay.
That evolved into Batwoman, and then on to Sandman Overture, and then to Echolands. So what's interesting about that dynamic is being an artist that thinks about the final impact, the design of a scene. I have to think in color, and I did from the very beginning thought about the color. Probably drove some colors nuts because I would have lots of notes.
Apparently Dave doesn't mind, though. He keeps coming back to work with you.
Yeah, I mean, he actually really enjoys the collaborative process, particularly because I might have a lot of notes, but there's also occasions where I'm not quite sure what to decide.
Yeah.
And so we'll have conversations about it. I'm like, I'm thinking this. What do you think, Dave?
Yeah.
You know, or it's collaborative in such a way to where he'll turn over a set of files for me to review, and I'll look at them, and so if it, for whatever reason, it's not resonating for me, we'll talk it out. I'm like, oh, I was thinking maybe let's try this. And he's so like, oh yeah, let's try that, you know? But at the same time, he's also understanding that there's occasions where I just need to do it all. Because for whatever reason, I want to fully paint it, or I'm after something that would be not fair to him to make him go round and round about it, because I'm after something that I'm not sure how to explain. So as an example, backtracking to that image with the trajectory of the rocket ship, and going into the black and white world, that whole sequence, well, first of all, if you get to see the raw cut editions of the series, that rocket ship is all 100% painted by me on every page. Same with the alien Oracle character. Is 100% painted.
Is that digital, Jim?
No, I paint it on the board.
Wow.
And so you'll get to see what that looks like if it was sitting on my drawing table. But when it came down to doing that scene with the crazy cosmic skyline, I was like, I got to do that myself, because I didn't want to drive him nuts going around and around about it. Because if it wasn't, I always worry that my notes aren't clear, you know. And if I'm trying to gain a certain emotional resonance, sometimes that's hard to put into words. And so I just felt it was easier for me to just paint the damn thing and capture it. And he's fine with that. He doesn't feel like I'm trying to step on his toes, because he understands I'm trying to achieve something. And it's not trying to dismiss the collaborative aspect of what makes comics is that partnership thing going on.
Amazing. There was a Russian author, it might have been Nabokov actually, who wrote "A truth once uttered is a lie," and the meaning behind that is like, as soon as something escapes your mouth, you lose control over its like interpretation. And it's sort of, and he said this is one of the it might have been the book. It might have been some of this. It's one of the great like perils of like communication, and it sort of feels like you're like that. You're like, if I give it to you, there's so many different ways you can interpret it, and you just have to do it yourself. I think it's really, it's like auteur status, right? It's like it's only you can do it.
Yeah, particularly because, especially if I know a general vibe that I want, I'm not even sure what that's going to be until I do it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? What I'm going to decide on is that's resonating for me.
Yeah.
You know, then I gotta be the one to be doing the experimentation there, and
Right.
to see what the result is. And so that happened all the way back for our collaborative partnership, all the way back into Seven Soldiers of Victory. Like there's pages in Seven Soldiers of Victory that are fully hand painted by me.
Mm-hmm.
And another sequence will be 100% Dave, but then there will be sequences, and this is true all the way up through, you know, Batwoman, Sandman to Echolands, where we might be both sharing process on a page. So
Yeah.
a sequence where, like I was saying, I'm painting the Oracle and the rocket ship in every shot because I want something very distinct for those.
Yeah.
Or I'll handle a whole panel
Right.
myself, and then he'll do the rest of the page. So when we're doing the credits for the credits on the interior cover of the book, it'd be insane to try to note all those things.
Yeah.
Right. So you just say artist, colorist. You know?
Yeah. Well, and it
Or
sounds like
color
you guys
artist, or however, you know.
and it sounds like you guys have had plenty of time to work on your process. I mean, you guys are professional collaborators at this point.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Now speaking of collaborators, and before we get too far away from Promethea, I've always been kind of curious. You know, Alan Moore uses a lot of symbolism in the visuals in his books, and there's a lot of like repeating motifs and like billboards and brands and like fictional meta universe characters that he continually goes back to, and a lot of that is present in Promethea. Was there, when you were working with him, was he really specific about like put this billboard with this gorilla here, or you know, make this purple here, do this, you know what I mean? Like how many of those little elements that were rooted in like the mysticism and the symbology or symbolism and things that like we would attribute to Alan Moore came from you, or was all that stuff from him?
So at the beginning, Alan really didn't give any notes about color. He basically was just like, this is the scene.
Yeah.
All these details are in the scene, but that's where he would like, if he wanted a billboard with Weeping Gorilla cartoon on it, he put that on there. But there's other times where he would say that detail in the panel description. But there'd be other times where I would come up with a Weeping Gorilla cartoon myself just because I wanted to put one. You know, now we got color notes. So all the colors design during that time would be chosen between me and Jeremy Cox. So, you know, that was a very collaborative process too. But I probably drove him a little nuts. I love Jeremy. He's such a sweet guy. But I think I probably
Poor sweet Jeremy.
You know, I don't know how it is for other comic artists, how much they think about the color momentum or the detail of the color. And I've always had from the beginning. And so I've always had those kinds of notes about things. And I don't know how much colorists are used to that.
Right.
So sometimes it would be involved conversations where I'm sure he had, you know, could have had time better served. You know? But notes from Alan about color became important symbolically with the exploration of the Tree of Life Kabbalah storyline.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because each of the realms that the characters visited, that Promethea went to, there were specific colors assigned to them. On metaphysic texts that Alan had.
Yeah.
So as an example, you know, when we get to the realm that's where I did all the impressionist painting stuff, the specific colors for that were like blue, bright yellow, and I think a darker blue was the palette limits. And so the trick was, when Alan wanted to capture those realities, color schemes that were set out in these texts that he had, it was up to me to figure out how to make them function true to being able to tell a comic story.
Yeah.
And so that was a pretty fascinating experiment every issue, because every issue, not only did we at that time change art styles, we changed color palette.
Incredible.
Yeah.
That's like a Starry Night color palette.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is one of the reasons why it led me to think about doing impressionist painting
Right.
for that sequence.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of the covers from that series were different homages to other artists, weren't they? You had you had like some Frazetta cover, you had a doll, you had some really cool covers on that.
Thought out by Todd Klein. So
cool.
Todd was doing all the lettering and logo designs for all of ABC. But he was also commissioned to sort of be cover artist, art director.
Wow.
Interesting.
And so since Promethea was a lot about thematically talking about the inspiration of what art can be and how art is magic and imagination is magic,
right,
it led Todd to think about, hey, why don't we try making these covers different homages to different things?
Yeah.
And so Todd would kind of, we would have discussions about it, and he'd be like, hey, this one, like with the Frazetta one, he's like, what do you think about, using Frazetta? And I think he actually, with that one, he even had selected the piece for us to homage the
cool.
Frazetta pose.
Yeah.
Cool.
For that. It was, from some of his comics work, I think, Frazetta comics.
Right.
So it would come down to that, and we would talk it out, and then I would figure out the compositions based on whatever idea he had, and then he would design the logo kind of around where I was trying to figure out compositionally.
It's like a pre-variant era variant, like this. See, Jim, you're doing this stuff before anyone else was. It's so cool just seeing where this stuff comes from.
Before we carry on here, I'm going to do a time check. Jim, how are you doing?
I'm fine.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, no worries. I set out for this afternoon, so.
Oh, thank you.
Hell yeah.
That was an interesting learning process for me. So not only was I getting this great collaborative experience with Alan, and of course Jeremy, but with Todd as well. And what was fascinating about working with Todd, here's Todd Klein, one of the greatest letterers comics has ever seen.
Yeah.
Deserved every award he's ever gotten. Numerous awards.
Shout out to letterers, unsung heroes, man.
Yeah. But at the same time, he was very collaborative, and it was like, hey, what do you think of this idea, Jim, for this cover? And we would talk it out.
Yeah.
And I would go and do it, and he would figure out the lettering for it. And that was a great learning experience. And it opened my mind to like, hey, this is fun, dabbling with these different homages. This is why should we stop here? We can continue that on to whatever else the fuck we're doing.
Yeah.
And but also he was collaborative in the sense that because my layouts for the book are so particular, the other thing I had to think about, not just the color of how the color would be applied, but where the lettering is going to go.
Sure.
And most letterers are used to figuring that out for themselves, or it comes from maybe editorial. They'll give them, editorial might say, here, I'll do this guide. But I think Todd, in the older days, I think Todd made a lot of those decisions himself. But here I come along, relatively an unknown, but but at the same time, he was one of the people that recommended me. So he was open to me figuring out my own balloon placements, all the text placements. And I felt the reason why that was important for me to do is because my layouts were so particular. I had to think about those ahead of time.
Wow. Yeah.
So if I'm laying out a page, I'm like, okay, I think the balloon text will work here. This is how the flow is, and this and that. And he was very open to me providing all the placements, and still is today. So his work on Echolands, he still is today. And the only time that would deviate is if for whatever reason what I allotted just didn't happen to work. Or the space wasn't working. You had to figure out an alternate solution. And he would just do it and see if I was okay with it.
Yeah.
So that being around supportive people that are supportive of my process really
Mhm.
helped me to improve my process and
Yeah.
to understand and get better at the storytelling of comics and being able to toy with the expectations of storytelling.
Right.
You know what I mean?
One thing that, speaking of process, one thing that James Syme says hi, by the way. I talked to him right before we spoke. He told me to make sure to ask you, because apparently you two have bonded over music quite a bit.
Yeah.
So there's two parts to this. One, he wants me to ask you about the Blondie Incident, which I'm pretty interested in hearing. But then also part of your process, he mentions that you are extremely influenced by many things, literature, film, but as we'd be remiss not to point out the incredible music collection behind you as well. So I guess the question is, what's the Blondie Incident? And two, what do you, how does music inform you, and what are you listening to right now? Or how did it start to inform your process?
I don't know how much music informs my process other than I would be inspired by some music visually. Like I might get weird images in my mind listening to a song or something like that.
Cool.
But it doesn't really impact like what I would do with a comic story, because the comic story has got to be what it's telling me it's supposed to be. So music for me while working is sort of like it just keeps me going.
Fuel for the machine.
Right.
Yeah.
And but there's other times where some music can be extremely inspirational. Like if you listen to something like Vangelis or a piece of classical music, instrumental music can really have a profound impact on what you're feeling as you're working sometimes.
Totally.
But one of the reasons why I have trouble with music being super informative of what I do is because the amount of time it takes me to do it versus the time it takes to hear a song.
Right.
Right. They just don't align. They just don't. And usually by the time I'm doing the work, I've already thought out the process. I've already thought about what the images are. So whatever I'm listening to has zero impact on what those images are, because I've already thought about that. So now the music is there for fuel as I'm doing what I would call the grunt work of executing the page.
Does it influence the color decisions at all that we were talking about a little earlier? Like when you're trying to figure something out? No?
Yeah, no, it really doesn't, surprisingly.
Nice.
I was really craving an answer like, when I did the design for Batwoman, I was listening. I was listening to 99 Luftballons, and
I was listening to Lady in Red, and I couldn't help myself.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. Yeah, no, it's weird. It doesn't. Yeah, I guess my brain is responding to two different things at the same time. During that part when I'm listening to music while working. Well,
let's be honest, the caliber of work that you do, all I'm picturing is an incredibly boring drawing studio if you don't have music going while you're working on some of those double page spreads, right?
Oh my God.
This page is going to take me several days. Like, I better have some cool tunes on.
It helps alleviate the insanity.
Sure.
And so that's probably the best thing I could say about that whole part of the process. Now the Blondie Incident.
I love it.
If my stories are too long, just say so. But
no way.
Do it.
Okay, so the first time me and my wife met James Syme and Kirsten.
That's James's girlfriend, everybody.
Yes. We were invited to do a signing at his store in San Francisco for Desolation Jones.
Cool.
And he also wanted to show the Desolation Jones art. So he wanted to have the art on hand on his wall gallery for, I can't remember, a month or so. I can't remember how long it was. And then we would have a signing and a little party. So we get up there for that, and we're hanging out, and it can always be weird the first time you meet somebody.
Yeah.
And we're talking and stuff, and he's saying how much he likes Desolation Jones and Promethea, of course. And then I noticed on behind his register, he had this little photo of Debbie Harry.
Yeah.
Just sitting there.
Still there.
And I don't know how quickly I noticed it, but when I finally noticed, I'm like, oh, Debbie Harry, cool. And then I think he's like, do you like Blondie? And I'm like, I think I was like, it just sort of turned into this conversation about how great Blondie is and Debbie Harry. So that really helped bond us really fast, because we were able to kind of connect on something outside of what comic books are.
Yeah.
And then years later, we had become friends with him and Kirsten really well, and Victor, who does some of his party DJing.
Yep.
Do you know Victor?
Yeah, so everybody, Isotope is sort of a 60s lounge, and that's also a comic book store. And James will have these parties. Well, he'll make cocktails related to an event. So like, there's like an X-Men thing coming up. He'll do like a Wolverine mule or something. And then it's a 2-level store. And on the top level, there'll be a DJ table, and Victor is the guy who does the DJ.
Yeah, and he's a super Blondie fan too. So we met Victor through James, and we all kind of became friends, and that's one of the things we connect a lot about. And I remember getting a text from James just randomly. He's like, hey, Blondie's on tour. They're going to play at this winery north of San Francisco.
Oh man.
And they're doing VIP tickets. We should all go and get VIP tickets. And VIP tickets in general are pretty damn expensive,
right,
for anybody. And so I remember getting off reading the message, and I was like, talking to my wife, I'm like, what do you think? And I'm like, it's kind of expensive. It'd be like $500 just for tickets, let alone the travel to there, staying overnight, and the whole business. We lived about 2.5 hours from there. Anyway, we decided to do it because we thought, it'd be cool to get to see the band, get to meet them, hang out with James and Kirsten and Victor. And so I said, a couple days before the concert, I was like, the Batwoman book had come out. I can't remember if it was Elegy or if it was Batwoman Volume 1. It might be Batwoman Volume 1 from when Hayden and I took over. It might have been around the hydrology book. I can't remember which one it was. Anyway, I'm like, I'm going to bring this and give it to him. I'm going to meet him.
Why not? Right?
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think I wrote something in there like, you guys are a huge inspiration or whatever.
Thanks, Deb.
Thanks, Deb.
It quickly was really ridiculous because they have the meet and greet before the show, and we're backstage in some sort of like I don't know. It wasn't the dressing rooms, but it was like an area where the band can hang out.
Yeah.
So we're back there and we're waiting for them to come out, getting increasingly more nervous. They finally come out, and they're just as awkward feeling as we are. You can see it all over their faces because they're just
awesome.
Kind of they're just kind of like, we're gonna meet these strangers.
All right. Guess we better get to it.
And I was okay. Let's give a little context here. When I was a kid, the first record I ever bought with my own money was a Blondie record. So I'm a lifelong Blondie fan.
And doing the math, you were a kid when Blondie was still CBGB, hanging out with the Ramones and Talking Heads. Yeah.
Yeah. So this was my discovery of Blondie was on their third album, which is Parallel Lines.
Great album.
Just as they became huge. And but the first record I actually was able to buy with my own money was off of Auto American, and it was the Atomic single.
Oh.
So it was around that period when I liked them beforehand, but when when you're making a purchase decision with whatever little dollars you have as a kid, and you choose to buy that, means that you're a fan. You know, that song was incredible. And so a lifelong Blondie fan. So seeing them come out to talk to us, there was meet and greet, and then of course they do the the obligatory photo.
Right.
You're going to get sent to you or waits for you or whatever. I don't know. And everyone gets to, they're all coming by and are shaking your hands. And James Syme, my wife is on this side, I think, and James Syme is on this side. And James knows how much I love Blondie.
This is the James story.
Yeah, and I think both him and my wife had their hands on my back because they could tell I was just completely uncomfortable and losing my mind. And James afterwards, James like, "You're fucking vibrating. You just, but I couldn't talk. I couldn't talk. I was like speechless. I think I would manage to squeak out hi or hello.
It's a good start, Jim.
I gave you this book. Here's this book I did. And I remember saying, like, Debbie shakes my hand, and I'm trying to talk. And I remember going to her, like, "I'm sorry, I'm all like that." And she's like, and she just kind of laughed, and she goes,
"Oh, that's so
I get it." Like that, back at me. And then it was over. And they went off to get ready for their show, and we all were ushered out to go get ready for the show. And as we're walking out, Wendy notices, like, the dressing room is open, and she notices Debbie talking to somebody. I don't remember if she said it was another band member or a staffer or something, and she had the Batwoman book open.
Cool.
And was looking at it and was pointed towards us as we were walking out. And so so I'm like super excited. At least I know they're actually going to look at it, right?
Yeah.
And so that's just racing in my head the entire time. We watch the show. The band's fantastic, of course.
Right.
Always great live show. And there was an opening band called Gorvette. And they were good too. And so after the show, we're like, "Hey, let's go check out the merch table. Maybe that opening band has a CD or something," right?
Yeah.
And so we're we go over to the merch table. That band's hanging out at their table. And so we're talking to them a little bit and purchasing some things here and there. And one of them goes, "Hey, what are you guys doing back here? You guys have the meet and greet. What are you doing? What are you doing here? You should be backstage." And we're like, "Oh, well, we were told that, it was only before the show." And we're like, "Oh, come on." And they're like, "No, that's ridiculous." And they walk us backstage.
Cool.
And we go back there. The band, Blondie's still not out. But there's a whole bunch of other people back there. Obviously, other friends of the band, whatever. There's a whole bunch of people back there. We're all standing around. James, my wife, Kirsten, Victor, we're all standing around, kind of like, "Oh, okay, we're back here now. What?" Just
yeah.
And then Chris Stein, I think he was the first to come out. And he comes out and he sees us and makes a beeline right for us.
Awesome.
And he's like, "Hey, that book is amazing." He's like,
Wow.
Really love that artwork. He's like, it's so cool. And then James, James is brilliant. He's like, Chris, I gotta tell you, this guy, he's a big deal in comics.
You sound exactly like James. That is such like a you gotta
hand gestures and all, And he's like, he's done amazing comics. There's this book Promethea. He's worked with Alan Moore, and then Chris Stein goes, "Wait, you know Alan Moore?"
So cool.
That changed the whole dynamic right there. And so he's asking, he's like, "Oh, what's that like?" And starts having this conversation with us about Alan Moore a little bit. And I have this nervous tendency to, I got a story about Neil Gaiman that's similar. I have this tendency to, if I see an impossible opportunity in front of me, I tend to not care what my social situation is like at the time, and I'll just blurt out something.
Incredible.
So I was like, well, if you ever need an artist,
yes.
Hey,
out.
Yes,
Blondie,
Jim.
if you ever need an artist, I got you, man.
Chris pauses for a second, literally only about a second, and he goes, "Next album cover."
He just knights you right there.
Just right there, right like that.
Wow.
And I'm like, I don't even remember how the conversation went after that.
Yeah. It's all
That's
a blur.
Ultimately, we end up everyone's got to go, and we all go to a restaurant, overnight restaurant, and we're all freaking out about the whole night and how much fun it was. And part of that night, I think also James presented something to us. He had picked up an award for us or something, and so he was handing it over to us and set up this whole thing where we're going to take pictures like we're at an award show. Something like that,
right.
which was super fun. So we stayed overnight at the hotel, I think. Yeah, I think we did. And then, but on the way home, we hadn't checked our messages, and we left, and I had messages on the home phone.
Mm-hmm.
And so we called the home phone to see if anybody called or whatever on our way back. And Chris Stein had already left a message on my phone.
What the?
He followed through. It wasn't just like one of those things where he was like, "You next album." He meant it.
Right, because that's what when we were sitting there having middle of the night breakfast. We talk about that. I'm like, he's being super nice and whatever. That's
right.
We can dream. But you expect that's just he's just being gracious and being nice. You don't know if they'll really develop into anything. But he left a message on the phone. I think we left that message from him on our phone for years.
Oh, I would too. Absolutely.
And he was like, it was so strange because he's like, "Here's my number. I have to apologize to you that I didn't realize who you were. I looked you up after our conversation, and now I understand. And I understand who you are." And he's like, "Yeah, call me."
What a surreal message.
Yeah.
You gotta. Hey Jim, you still have his number? You want to get him on this call right now? We could say hi to Chris.
No, I'm not gonna do that. That would be so mean.
Well, little did you know, we got Blondie here.
And then so from there, it just became a legit thing, and that collaborative process was super fascinating and just as daunting and nerve-wracking to me at the beginning as it was when I first started working with Alan, because these people are world iconic musicians,
rock stars,
larger than life,
rock stars, right? And but they were so down to earth, incredibly down to earth.
That's so cool.
I mean, to such an extent, this sounds like I'm trying to be sound more important than I am or whatever, but it's not the way I intend this. But I can text him anytime. I can talk to him anytime. That's what I mean by down to earth. He's very
That's
like,
cool.
hey, cool, we're whatever, and I get to go hang out with them if they're in town, that kind of
That's so
thing.
great.
Wow.
That's how down to earth they are. And in some ways, it made it a little nerve wracking. The down to earthness was so much that when it came time to talk about what the album art would be, they let us listen to demos. So me and my wife listened to the demos, and we were talking about different ideas and things that came in our mind.
Wow.
And when it came time to present the ideas to Chris, we had a phone meeting between him and me and Debbie Harry, and that was funny because her dog was going nuts in the background, and she's chasing around her dog.
Stars, they're just like us.
Yeah, exactly. And but it's so down to earth that when I'm trying to explain my loose ideas to him, he's like, yeah, whatever you want to do, just
Right.
sort of like, and that was so strange because I'm thinking they're going to have a lot to say about what the end result is.
I mean, it's Blondie, right? Yeah.
Right. And they were just like, it's yours, go do it,
Yeah.
to such an extent that before I could decide exactly what the visuals would be, I wanted to know the album title. And Chris is like, I don't know what the album title is,
Yeah.
Because I wanted to do something that thematically fit with whatever the title was. I didn't want some artwork that just didn't align with what the thing is called.
Yeah.
Right.
I always find that odd when I see that on albums. But
yeah.
So he's like, I don't know. And it led to a conversation between me, him, and my wife, where we're running through different album titles. And and
cool.
So me and my wife helped name the album,
Oh my God.
I mean, that's how open and down to earth he can be.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine sitting with like one of your favorite bands. It'd be like me sitting down and be like, why don't we call it A Night at the Opera, Freddie? And just being like, that's a great idea.
So just to save the people watching at home a little bit of research, what was the album that you ended up being the artist for? What was the name of that one?
And naming
Ghosts of Download.
Ghosts of Download.
Cool.
All right. I'm gonna go check that out as soon as we're done here today. That's awesome story, man.
Well, this actually might be a pretty good segue. We have taken up about an hour and a half of your time, an incredible amount of time. So
it's all right.
Let's do our last. Want to do our famous short-boxed desert island question? People either hate this or love this.
Before we do that, I feel like we are sometimes remiss. We get so wrapped up in how cool our guests are that we forget to talk about Shortboxed as a platform and how we are the premier place to buy graded comics. So with that in mind, I'm curious a little bit about what your collection habits have turned into as your careers progress. It sounds like when you're a kid, you collected a ton of stuff, but if the records behind you are any indication, you're a collector, man. So how's the comic collection looking these days? What are you reading?
What am I reading? I just got done reading a book called it was actually lent to me from a friend. The book is called Fictional Father by Joe.
Never heard of that.
Oh.
We got to look that up. Wow.
It's Ullman. Yeah.
It's easy to
Ullman.
Ullman. It's easy to stump me, but if you stump Kevin, that's a big deal.
I don't think I've heard of that one. I'm gonna definitely check that out. So what is like this? Are you still collecting like single issues and new stuff that's coming out? Too much? Me too, man. Me too. My weekly pull when I was running the shop was like 35 titles a week. It's too much. had to peel it back a little less variance, a little more, just reading the stories. It's
ever since starting to go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say I pick up too much stuff that I'm always like way behind on whatever.
Yes.
Current, so I end up reading in giant chunks.
Yeah.
The other thing I get suckered into a lot is a lot of the omnibuses of old stuff.
Yeah.
I think that's fine. I think omnibuses are probably one of the best investments you can make in like the collected works of comics.
Yeah,
Especially from a collector's value standpoint.
Yeah, and it's allowed me to get runs of things I used to have as a kid, or things I never got to read as a kid. I'm like, oh, I gotta check that out. That sort of thing.
Well, let's be honest. Who wants to pull out their sub 100 issues of X-Men and thumb through those and hope they don't rip a page or leave a big old stinky thumbprint right in the middle of the cover?
Right.
Yeah.
So I get super excited when I see things like last year when Marvel decided to release, shockingly, an omnibus of Kazar.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
I was like, no way. I loved that series as a kid, and so I'm like, oh, that series is so incredible. And so I was shocked that they did an omnibus of it. I'm like, how can I resist that? It's archival,
seriously
printing, So
As an artist, do you ever go in on like the artist editions, like the big monster books that show process and art pages?
Once in a while. Yeah. I'm really
they can be very expensive.
Yes, it's hard. I know there's a lot of artists that dive deep into those. But my habits are already so costly, I tend to try to avoid them.
Sure.
But I do have some for sure. Or I'll do something weird, like, as an example, I'll have Jim Starlin's Warlock, and I have a nice collection of that in an omnibus. But then Marvel just recently put out a treasury-sized edition, hardcover, full color version of Warlock, and I ended up buying it again.
Man,
at first I was like, why am I going to get this again? But at the same time, I'm like, I'm going to get to see it almost full size, a huge size. And so I'm like, and the price was really reasonable for a Marvel hardcover book. And so I ended up deciding to get it. And once I got it home and I opened it up, I'm like, oh yeah, this is a no-brainer. This is really dumb. I
worth it.
Questioned getting this. And then they have in the back of it, they did a little bit of printing of some of the original art in the back too.
Cool.
But seeing it at that size was just like,
it's incredible.
Right.
Yeah. Seeing the blue lines and the red lines, just there's nothing quite like it. I always used to joke with customers that would walk out with those things. I'm like, congratulations on your purchase of a coffee table without legs, or if there's ever a storm warning, you can use 2 of these to board up a window. Like,
that's right.
Enjoy.
Yeah. I had some artist editions given to me, and then I had some not just artist editions, but also some artists like what they're called, the gallery editions.
Sure.
Because they were wanting to do Sandman Overture for that format. Cool. And so they wanted to show me what that would look like. And so I got to see some that way. And then there was things that I got on my own, like I got the Daredevil Born Again, the Mazzucchelli.
Miller run.
I bought that. Got that signed.
Wow.
Cool. Yeah, an editor friend of mine who was in New York at the time, he's like, Frank Miller's going to be here, and he's going to, he can sign this. Or wait, was it Mazzucchelli? Anyway, he's like, do you want this? I can get you one. And I was like, yeah, get it for me. So,
that's so cool.
That was the first artist edition book I actually ever got to see, was that. And that was just mind-blowing, seeing all the acetates and stuff that would be used. And then I bought a copy of Ronin myself.
Gotta have a Ronin for sure.
That blew my mind, seeing the originals printed in that book were just mind-blowing. And then I got a Frank Thorne one, a couple Frank Thorne ones.
Very cool.
And I bought the Michael Golden Micronauts one.
Right.
Of course. Yep.
So I have I guess maybe 10 of them. 10.
Damn. Yeah. So you're a collector.
You're a collector.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's always cool to hear. It's always like kind of startling when you talk to someone who's like prolific or has a bunch of ideas and they're always working on things, and you're like, what comics are you reading? They're like, oh, I don't actually read that.
We hear that. I mean, we've done several of these interviews. We hear that a lot. People are like, oh, I don't know what I'm reading right now, and you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah. for me, it's dangerous because I do like a lot of the, monthlies as they come out. But
Totally.
like I said, the omnibuses and stuff, I get
Yeah.
the more expensive books I'm attracted to too. So like another thing I recently purchased, I haven't gotten a chance to read it, but I cracked it open and was flipping through it, was the Steve Rude Nexus Gormando book.
I don't know what that is.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
checking it out.
Gormando. That sounds super familiar.
It's okay. See, Steve Rude did a comic newspaper of Nexus.
Okay.
And it was something Gormando is the title, but he printed those as old style Sunday comics sized newspaper strips. Well, he produced a hardcover of all the strips, full size.
Wow.
And it's got also got black and white artwork in it as well. You have to, it's incredible.
Okay, I'm gonna check that out. Yeah, we're gonna check that out. I'm gonna hit you up and let you know what I think. Oh, he's gonna show it to us.
No, this just reminded me. My wife got this for me as a gift.
Whoa!
Steve Rude Nexus painting.
Incredible. That's a good.
Yeah.
Your wife is awesome. We've heard a little bit about her today.
Yeah.
I think she's awesome.
She's the best. But yeah, so collecting.
I have never heard of this comic.
Yeah.
Yeah, Nexus.
We'll have to dig in. That's
We're
super
gonna.
cool.
Steve Rude is a master.
He is.
Yeah.
He is. His art always just makes me think Marvel Masterpiece.
Yeah.
You know, like him and Jusco, those guys, their art styles are also quite iconic.
Oh wow, this is great.
With all the stuff that you read and collect and dabble in and check out, are there any particular artists that you're like keeping an eye on as like the next John J.H. Williams the third, like the next person who's breaking ground and doing things that surprise you and kind of keep you on your toes?
That's a great question.
There are some people. There's a lot of people I keep my eye on that I love for a whole variety of reasons.
Sure.
Not necessarily.
Got any like top 5 or top 2 that you want to share with us?
This is a better version of the short box.
No,
question.
because it'd be remiss. I would.
Okay,
miss
fair enough.
somebody.
I hate those small lists anyways. I
always
got to throw it out there.
Worms. But there's a lot of artists I follow for a whole variety of reasons, not just, I don't necessarily look for people that are, look how designy they're being or whatever. I just look for, what I enjoy. Like I'm in, like we were talking about a little bit earlier, I'm inspired by a whole variety of things. So I'm the same with comic artists. I'm attracted to a whole variety of styles. But there are there's a lot of guys doing incredible stuff. I think some of them, the indie market has a lot of experimental people that I really appreciate a lot.
Totally.
Chris Ware is the obvious one.
Oh my God. Yeah. Prolific.
It's just insane sense of design in terms of looking at design.
Speaking of extra oversized books.
Right. But then you have someone who is trying to do something different. Marco Rudy, his book, what's it called? RDW or DWDR? He recently put out a graphic novel that he got funded through Kickstarter, I think. And I bought a copy of that, and it's all fully painted, written by him and fully painted. Maybe he had a co-author. I can't remember.
RDW,
but if you get a chance to look at those pages, there's a lot of design stuff going on in them, but not in the way you might expect, particularly because he's doing 100% paint.
Yeah.
There's like this interesting fluidity that he's got going on that I find fascinating. But then I gravitate to stuff like I was sent a gift of this, it's hard to tell from this cover, but Alex Nino. Do you know?
Oh, looks cool though.
He's a Filipino artist.
Ooh,
Ooh.
should tell Ray about that. Ray would
Yeah.
love it.
He's been a long time favorite of mine, forever,
cool.
ever since I was young. And he's done stuff for the American comics industry here and there. But this book, I guess, is the first fully Filipino graphic novel, I think is what they're.
Wow, we need that for the office. The co-founders of Shortboxed are both Filipino.
Yeah, and I did some interviews for the Comics Cube, if you're familiar with that podcast.
Yeah, those are some of the
Yes.
ones that I was reviewing before
Yeah.
our chat today. Very, very in depth, very, very cool interviews.
Yeah, and Doi, the guy who runs that, sent this to me as a gift.
Oh, so cool.
Because
That's
it's
awesome.
only published there. Surprisingly published in English though.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I think
Interesting move.
English is spoken quite a lot in the Philippines actually because of the American troops over there.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so that was great to see. I think he was saying that Nino came out of retirement to do the book.
That's awesome.
And what was surprising when I got it, I was like, oh, it's landscape, like Echo Lands.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's right up your alley. As soon as I saw that book, I'm like, you want to do a book like that? Because it's awesome.
Did you check out Brian K. Vaughan's Barrier at all? That was also like a pretty recent landscape format book. No dialogue at all except for like Spanish and English, like two people from different worlds not able to communicate. Like
Barrier.
I love a good landscape comic. I love double page spreads.
Yeah, Private Eye was like that too.
Private Eye was very freaking cool. Yeah. Amazing stuff.
All right, gang, we got to wrap this up.
All right, sorry to keep us rolling here, Crow. Go ahead with your desert island question.
Don't worry about it.
Well, I
ramble on so these things can go. No. You know,
honestly, we should just do another one. I mean, if we've got more to talk about.
I think we should. John, Jim, I think that just like the flow of our conversation today has been so like magical. I'd love to revisit this again at some point in the future if you'd be down.
Yep, for sure.
Awesome.
If you're in the Bay Area, we should get you up here.
Mm-hmm. Oh, definitely. Crow has a question for you. We ask all of our interviewees regarding. Take it away, Crow.
Well, I was going to let you were halfway there.
No, you do it. I've talked so much this 2 hours we've been talking.
So some people hate this question. Some people love it. Some people are sort of like, I'm not going to answer that. But you're on a desert island. You got a short box with you. You got 5 things to put in it. And those things can be miniseries, single issues, and omnibus counts. What do you take with you?
Micronauts, of course. Entire everything published.
Nice.
Rom the Space Knight.
Ooh, cool.
Yes, good call.
Shogun Warriors.
Nice.
Let's see. Anything by Mobius.
Yes.
Like the Eagle.
Yes.
Eagle.
That's 4, right? Is that 4?
Mobius is besides you, Jim, is my favorite artist. I love Mobius. Yeah.
Let's see what else. This is tough question because I know there's stuff that I'm like, I should have said that.
I will tell you, Jim, that you are like already 200% faster at answering this than most people. Like we said, we get people who don't read or collect the way that we do, and they have a really hard time with this question and kind of hate Crow for it. So I'm glad that you.
This is never the like. This is the way they end the interview. It's a bad taste.
Man, this is a tough question because there's so many great things I would want to have.
Well, I'll propose an alternative. For your final item, you can also choose a piece of music to bring with you.
Ooh.
Calling an audible here.
An audible.
An audioable.
How about Blondie's Auto American?
That's it. So that's the. I think we've done so many of these. over the years. I think that's the first time where you've chosen 5 completely unique items. I mean, because usually somebody's like, oh, I'll have a Batman or I'll have a big one. So I've never heard Micronauts. Well, I've never heard any of this before. Totally unique. So congratulations.
Oh, cool. I mean, that's what makes the question so difficult, is because there's so much great stuff, particularly, just an enormous amount of iconic material, when you just look at the history of Marvel and DC alone. But at the same time, I ended up picking, 3 Marvel things, but it's all stuff that
you weren't picking them because they were Marvel. You were just picking them because they have had such a big impact and something you go back to regularly. Yeah, I feel that.
But as far as, it's tough because there's a bunch of indie books, I would love to.
Yeah, that's not even dipping into creator, there's some fire going on there. In fact, let's make that a cool little talking point on our next chat. I'd love to talk indie comics a little more with you. That'd be fun.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Cool, brother. All right.
My headphones died, so we've been doing this for a long time.
You've sounded fine to me, Crow. I don't think there's been any issues with the audio.
Good. All right, everybody, thank you for joining us. It's been Kevin and Crow with Shortboxed, and of course, the master himself, J.H. Williams III. We're going to post this. We're going to cut up the interview so we can people can have in digestible chunks, and you'll see that in the app or on our YouTube. Actually, the last question, Jim, what do you got coming up? Where can we find you?
I'm working on Echoland 7 right now, but I'm not sure when that's going to come out. The pages for Echoland 7 are insane. Most of it's in Horror Hill, and so some of those pages are taking me 2 weeks for one spread.
Oh, I bet. I can't wait to see it, man.
So when you do the math, it's
well, you guys had what from 2018 until now to get this first arc of Echolands going, so it's not like it's the same kind of lead time.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. So I have that, and then I'm working on some writing projects. I can't really say what they are, unfortunately, until it's been given the okay to talk about. But there are some other things. There's some other things in the works. Couple music related projects that I did. There's little small things for music. So
excellent. Are you doing any conventions this year on the circuit? Are you going to be tabling anywhere? Okay.
No, I know things are getting safer, and Omicron has made things to where it's endemic, and everyone's going to be exposed to it, and that's the one you want to get if you're going to get it. But at the same time, I'm not in a rush to go out into public space.
I don't blame you at all, man. I don't blame you at all, especially cons, which are notorious for close quarters, sweaty interactions with fans. So I understand that.
And I'm not good in large crowds to begin with.
Okay.
Me and my wife are both kind of but at the same time, it's she's also been saying, it's probably time to start easing our way out. And we're both frustrated because Orville Peck is going to play here in Vegas at the end of April. And we're but at the same time, we both feel as great as that would be, and things are getting better, it could be okay to go, but would we have a panic attack?
Panic attack.
It takes a little while to get used to being out in people again. It took me a bit too, so I understand that for sure.
Yeah, and so, but as far as conventions, I've had a hard time going to conventions for a while, even before all this happened, because the amount of time it eats up. From
it's intense.
A project that already takes a ton of time was hard to justify.
Totally.
So we'll see, maybe next year in 2023. Yeah.
That sounds good. Well, we'll see you again the next time we chat with Shortbox, Kevin and Crow. And thank you so much, man, for joining us today. This has been a blast. Absolutely.
Cool. Thanks for having me on.
All right, Tim. Take care, brother.
You too.